It's time for the Beach Brothers Show. Beach Brothers, Virginia business and politics. Three brothers who live in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and we love Virginia business and politics. Conrad Schesventer is our booking agent. If you'd like to appear on our show, contact Conrad. Jose Cruz is our business bully. If you'd like for your business to be featured on the show, contact Jose. I'm Seko Varner, your producer. Shouts to our sponsors, beginning with Tally and Twine. It's time for a high-quality watch from Tally and Twine. That's tallyandtwine.com. Thanks to Southern Volkswagen Greenbrier for all the great sponsorship you've provided. If you're looking for a new car, you don't need to go far. Southern Volkswagen Greenbrier. Ladies, you want your brows to make people say, wow. So you need microblading from IamLitaWe.com. That's IamLitaWe.com. I'm Seko Varner, and I provide credit fixes, tax resolution, private money lending, and debt consolidation through Positive Vibes Financial. Contact me for your needs. And Conrad Schesventer is running for VB City Council. Good luck to Conrad. And now it's time to get beachy on the Beach Brothers Show. All right, definitely time to get beachy. Definitely time to get beachy. And speaking of the beach, we have one of the beachiest people I know who's running for city council in the beach. And tonight we're doing something a little different. We're going to actually interview, cross-examine.
Okay.
The woodshed, you know.
He's in the hot seat.
Put him in the hot seat.
Yep. There you go.
Have him run the gauntlet. And we're going to deal with tourism, regionalism, economic opportunity, and public safety. And the good queen, Miss Owens, is going to be joining us, I hope. She'll be
momentarily.
Momentarily. Good stuff. Good stuff. Tonight was called Police Reform. And we're going to deal with some other things that deal with the beach as well. Good sister, good to have you on tonight. How are you doing?
Hello, how are you?
Welcome.
Good. Well, you're going to be doing a lot of the interviewing with good friend Conrad tonight. And why don't you introduce yourself very quickly? You've been on our show before. We all love you. You know, half of Virginia has a crush on you. You're doing big things in the Republican Party. So all the red hats love you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Lucia Owens. I was running for city council up until about the end of June. I was involved in a really bad car accident in June, and I was pregnant 20 weeks when it happened. Between COVID and that, I pretty much was like, okay, this is a double whammy. Let me kind of reevaluate everything. And we decided, my husband and I both agreed that it was probably best to just kind of let the election go, let the campaign go for the time being, focus on my pregnancy. And as a result, I was lucky enough to have a happy and healthy baby boy as of last Tuesday. So he's a week old today. Sean Wilford Owen, and very big boy. Thank you very much. 8 pounds, 14 ounces, 22 inches long. So, and I'm also in the process of getting my house renovated. So I'm staying at the local KOA campground in Virginia Beach right now. With my parents have a really nice fifth wheel. So we're kind of staying there because of the animals. So it's been very interesting for the past week. But yeah, I'm here. I've been involved in wrestling throughout the years. I've been involved with politics, anywhere from my internship when I was in college all the way up until recently with the campaign. So yeah, it's been fun.
Okay. Hey, you were also involved with the recent chairman position with the Republican Party, right?
Yes, Jimmy Frost was on my team when I was running for at large. And Jimmy Frost is actually, so it started off, Jimmy actually goes a little bit further back in my family, because my husband's family actually started Cat Rescue Incorporated It's a nonprofit cat rescue organization, and Jimmy actually was affiliated with it, and he first started getting into his bearings of building websites because of their organization. So it was very interesting how our paths crossed after because of political campaigning. But yeah, Jimmy Frost is definitely a dear friend that I will always support in any initiative that he'll go for.
And he does love cats.
Yeah, he does. He does. Yeah, Jimmy's a good friend of the show. Salute, Jimmy Frost. Okay, well, today you're going to be asking a lot of the questions to this guy right here. So
hopefully I come good with it.
I hope so.
All right, so we're going to deal with tourism, regionalism, economic opportunity, and public safety, which is a politically correct way of saying police reform, or what do we do with the police, or should we do anything with the police? You know, so public safety. If RK was here, he would say law and order.
Yes, he would.
I love the way you dressed that up, though.
Hey, salute to our good friend RK. But hey, the floor is yours, Miss Owens.
So, so Conrad, so one of the questions that, the first one was tourism industry. And essentially, everybody knows with the city of Virginia Beach and the number one economic driver is obviously, we know, the military. Second one is tourism. So after a hard tourist season that was heavily impacted by COVID, what would you consider to be the best course of action for the city to take in order to help our local businesses rebound?
All right. Also, don't forget we have a pretty good agriculture sector in Virginia Beach too. So we're always trying to protect that. But tourism, ideas I may have on helping the tourism sector be helpful, that's the focus. And I will say from my own two eyes that this is the worst year I've seen at the front desk. And I worked at a hotel front desk since 2005. This even compares to 2008 and 2009, which was during the previous economic global cataclysm. It just simply wasn't as hard on tourism as a global pandemic is. But I still say there is pent-up demand. I mean, just look at this past October weekends, we've either sold out or been within 10 rooms of selling out all the month on the Friday nights and Saturday nights. And people do want to do activity at the ocean front. They're on beaches, they're on the boardwalk, they go into restaurants, they do mini golf. Of course, they don't do the movie theater because that's closed. The course of action requires some stubbornness, and that's on the health front, because let's stick to the basics. Keep the mask mandate signs up. We have two of them that are at the front desk from the city of Virginia Beach that say no mask, no service. It's a simple preventative measure to reduce the harmful effects of a respiratory pathogen spreading in the air. Is that something that Democrats like? Well, it seems like it to me. Is it something Republicans have to hate? I would probably say no, they don't have to. Remember, all the restaurants are open and the alcohol laws were more liberalized regarding to-go orders with cocktails and stuff. I dare say the Virginia APC should keep that going even if there wasn't COVID. I would encourage more freedom on food truck vendors even. I mean, of course, a couple that come to mind on the food truck front are MJ Medler and Kevin Dooley, two business owners in the city who have food trucks with exceedingly tasty food, and their business could use a chance to expand around the beach. My, of course, suggestion to do that, it might be something that some on the right would necessarily dislike because I suggest it. I'm not necessarily sure. I know restaurant owners in the tourist areas may raise a stink on that, as that's a competition to them in areas that they can't reach because they're locked into a building. But if we deny it because of those established restaurant owners, that kind of sounds like protectionism. And is that something that we really need out there? I don't think so. Oceanfront protectionism isn't something I want to do even because I work there. I know that kind of work at the oceanfront, but I'm offering my candidacy to not view the oceanfront as something that requires more power and more prestige than the rest of the city's interest. And I think Republicans can get on board with that too, just as independents can or Democrats can.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you totally agree with everything that Conrad said?
Not necessarily. Maybe
I
not
don't
the
agree with
mandate.
everything.
Okay, what do you
I
push
don't
back on?
necessarily consider them. So the mask mandates, I would say, is basically going to be collectively, not necessarily your partisanship. For example, I was in the hospital for a day and a half due to labor and delivery. I pushed my child out with a face mask on. And it's not the most comfortable thing to do. It's not the most comfortable thing to wear. Mind you, it can be overwhelming sometimes, but it's something that my daughter even wears all day long at school right now. So she's in first grade and she has to wear it. And it's fine. And we're okay with that. You know, she's gotten used to it. And I think it's more of who takes it seriously and who's not. Because we know there's always going to be people with conspiracy theories. People still can have conspiracy theories about 9/11.
Yes.
I think it's everything. It comes down to the background of the person, what they're willing to absorb. Because some people just don't, the government's telling you do it, they'll just say, no, I'm not doing it because of the fact that they just don't feel that the government should control them. But I don't think it's necessarily a full partisan issue. I know that the school board has made a huge issue of Laura Hughes and the fact that she is affiliated with the Republican Party and she refuses to wear it. She doesn't refuse. It's just because she has a medical issue that deems it that it could be more hazardous for her to wear one rather than not wear one. But you know, and in this day in society, everybody's taking responsibility. But I think the thing is not necessarily taking responsibility on yourself, but for others. And you're keeping the mask on not to benefit necessarily yourself, but to benefit the other people around you. Virginia Beach as a whole is very good about collectively congregating around people and when they're in need. For example, like Laura Hughes, if everybody else is wearing their face mask, then she shouldn't. If she has a medical issue, then that shouldn't be a big problem. So, but yeah, I kind of disagree on that. I think when it comes to the oceanfront and the tourism industry, tourism has been impacted tremendously. And I think it's not necessarily just COVID. I think a lot of it also has to do with the protests that they were doing throughout the entire season. So that's something that I think the city needs to address, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the fourth topic of the evening, which is public safety.
I might raise a point on that one.
I clapped when you said that you pushed your child out and wearing a mask. So I was clapping because you pushed that child out. That's something I can't do. So I salute all the mothers for doing that. So that's why I was clapping. I know I'm going to get pushed back. You want no? I was clapping because the mother gave birth. That's a beautiful thing. I salute that. Salute that. But if we're looking at what Virginia Beach should do to help local businesses, when we're looking at tourism, I'm not so sure that face masks are that big of an issue. What other things? What other things can be done to make sure that the beach businesses, the oceanfront area businesses thrive? How can they rebound? That's kind of what I'm interested in.
The trick is how much exactly can municipal government do? How much could be saved by a small reduction of a local sales tax? How much can be saved by a small reduction of a property tax? If it's played out over an amount of months as COVID's been with us, does that save a number amount of businesses? If it does, yes, look for it. But if you do commit to that, you're going to take a lot less out of the city coffers, and that is itself a separate problem. So we would have to look at trying to balance that.
Good point.
So you really think that the protests have made people in large, not in small, but in large, say, I ain't going to the beach?
I don't think so.
I've
had a couple people cancel.
I don't think so.
But most of the people still come. They've had like one or two calls on back closer to May 31st when they were doing with the protests more often. Some people might read on the news and like, hey, is there going to be a protest at the beach? Some person might call and they might not make the reservation. And then we still sell 70 rooms. So it's still very largely attractive beyond the protests.
Okay.
All right.
Well, you're down there. I'm not.
That's more of an anecdote.
Those
from my
front line.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes we make bigger deals out of smaller things to make big points. So at any rate, hey, let's go to the next topic. Unless you wanted to continue with this one, Sister Owens.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay, all right. Like I said, we're following your lead right now.
Okay,
Regionalism.
So my second topic is regionalism. So right now we know that there are a few candidates, and this isn't just this race. There was candidates previously in other races, in years prior, where we have financial backers from other cities. Only reason I know this is because I know a few of them, coming predominantly from Norfolk, and then they are heavily investing their money into candidates running for council in Virginia Beach, which is very interesting because this interest can be conveyed on our local races, because there's special interest wanting to focus on pursuing regionalism. What would you do? What would you see as initiatives that would assist in the direction of regionalism, and do you support it?
Well, I'll also sort of start off with the candidates that are backed by some of those outside interests. There are some very notable ones too. For instance, Jody Wagner for mayor. I have already voted for her, and I encourage others to vote for her. But I can admit that is a lot of outside the city money. And the same goes with my opponent in Rose Hall, Mr. Bellucci. I mentioned this at the Sandbridge Forum, which is about a week ago. This has a lot of money in this campaign. And on his side, over 90,000. And significant chunks of that come from city interests that aren't necessarily Virginia Beach. For instance, a real estate entity in Norfolk, or MEB contractors, which are the people that built, I think it's the sports center on 17th Street, but they're in Chesapeake. And they also have dropped thousands on the other mayor county that Bobby Dyer. My premise isn't so much that money from outside the city is itself a problem. Do not let the money necessarily be a problem, because I can't deny I wouldn't want more campaign money so I could be more competitive. My concern is just not letting the money lead you into the direction of undue influence. And I can't really say that, say, Jody would be unduly influenced by out of the city big Democrat interests. She's been working with Democrat governors before, many different administrations. Mr. Bellucci had a foundation fundraising event in Norfolk last year, and he also has support from across the aisle. Does that itself mean that something like Democrats and Republicans should hate that? I don't necessarily think so. No more than if I received no money and I stayed at home. Ideas are ideas, and you should vote for ideas. For instance, I'm not against, and this is going back to the topic, regionalism. I don't find that to be a problem that Democrats per se, or independents or Republicans, have to disagree on if they like the goals of prosperity and justice. I like regionalism, and I'm running an ad on my page right now underscoring that I would work directly with leaders from other cities to pursue my overreaching goal of transforming Hampton Roads Transit, it's in the name, Hampton Roads, into a bona fide rapid bus transit model. And I want to rapidly decrease commute times on public services, because that boosts the entire community and helps everyone from Williamsburg to Suffolk to Virginia Beach. There's nothing inherently anti-Republican against that idea, nothing inherently pro-Democrat with that idea, other than it seems that Democrats seem to like public transit expansion a little bit more so than Republicans, because Republicans are concerned for costs and some problems with not in my backyard. Could regionalism spur some bad ideas? Possibly. Light rail, in my view, and a lot of others' views, is expanding public transit in a way that is not as useful as rapid bus transit. In Virginia Beach, it was just a straight line from west to east. And heck, it failed to get a positive public vote, and the city kept that funding mechanism for a rail system it otherwise wouldn't have used because it didn't exist. And it sounds like that's a perfect avenue to decrease bus route commute times in a comfortable way if they take that rail money. I think Republicans and independents can jump on all that. They don't have to be against it.
Interesting. I think regionalism you can convey it that way, where you're not concerned about outside investors coming in and helping with campaigns. But ultimately, when somebody invests in you, we ultimately know that they're doing what they're investing in you because they know that you're going to do what's best for their best interests. It's just interesting when you have a notable amount of residents from the city of Norfolk who are showing considerable interest in the Virginia Beach race, especially when we know that light rail is always going to be brought back onto the table, especially with their pursuit of the casinos lately, between them and Portsmouth. And it's more coming from one city than the others. That can provide a little bit of concern for Virginia Beach because, Virginia Beach is the big tourist industry, as in goes in hand with number one. Norfolk doesn't really necessarily have a large tourist industry like we do.
Correct.
So it could be conveyed, I think, regionalism could be conveyed as kind of piggybacking off of our tourist industry in order to help out that city. That's what I would say. Because I found it very interesting. For example, I'll put the scope in perspective. When the scope was looking at, they needed to redo it because they wanted to expand. They wanted to make it a bigger area. And Will Sessions popped out and said, "Hey, we're going to build our own arena." And I was absolutely against it. I thought it was the stupidest thing ever. We have one. We have a scope. Let it go. It's in Norfolk. You want to let it, people can go to Norfolk to do that. People can come to Virginia Beach to go to the beach. Let it go. Just let us work together. That was what I would consider as regionalism, but not necessarily pushing off something that is like light rail. I'm not a big proponent of light rail. I saw it when I was working in downtown Norfolk. I saw it right when it started. They started breaking ground. I remember when they blew up the old library to remove it and to move it over across the street and across from MacArthur. And I remember, and I also was there when it started working. I think the only time people from Virginia Beach use the light rail is when they're coming to a festival or an event down in Norfolk. But people normally don't come from Norfolk to come to Virginia Beach for anything. So, and the fact that there's the ridership was dropping. So I think trying to push light rail into moving it into Virginia Beach so we could start pulling some funds from Virginia Beach to help out with light rail because Norfolk was bleeding from it, was not a good promotion in terms of regionalism because, don't pacify debts to us. So I find it interesting. I'm okay with working with cities, and I think that you are too, Conrad. But I think when it comes to the campaigning perspective, you also need to take into consideration when somebody invests heavily, they're going to expect something in return, as they're always bringing up with the Bruce Thompson and the Bruce Smiths, that whole argument right now with the Rudy Loop, and we'll talk about that later. But the whole is why would so many residents in another city invest heavily in a specific candidate if they don't think they're going to get their return on their investment?
I'm also curious how many Virginia Beach interested parties spend money in Norfolk or Chesapeake.
That would be interesting to look into. I don't know that number.
Is Virginia Beach considered the leader, and that's why everyone in Newport News, Hampton, Suffolk want to send money this way because we take the lead. And if we take the lead, then we might need to take a little bit more of a leadership issue on mutualistic interest if they help the community.
Hey, we're number one. We're number one. We're number one. Hey, I want to answer the question who popped in. Shareem Owens asked concerning the casinos, is there a designated percentage of jobs reserved for residents? If she's talking about the ones that are happening in Norfolk and Portsmouth, I believe that's part of the table. I don't know a lot about it, and I'm not sure if that's even part and parcel with tonight, but I know that you brought up the casinos. 2 nights ago, we talked about the casinos on this show because the Pamunkey Indians, who are fronting the casino in Norfolk, who were not even native to Norfolk, they're actually native to the Richmond-Williamsburg area, are they have a history of anti-Black racism, and they had Black laws that were on the books. It was codified. It was part of the federal agreement they had. Then they got their sovereignty, and they say they've cleaned things up, but I think a Norfolk resident would be wise to really make a decision and look deeply into that situation. So we don't know about the designated percentages. Oh, I don't. Lucia, do you know?
I don't know the designated percentages. I did see on the news where they had that opposition in terms of the where they had brought up the information about them having the racial indiscretions in the past. And I know that the casinos, a lot of them, in order to get bypassed, and this is something they brought up years ago, a couple years, I think it was like 2-3 years ago, with the casino bringing it to Norfolk, is the fact that they're operated by the Native American tribe or shall I say indigenous, which I'm actually a card-carrying member of a tribe, FYI. I'm a Native American. But
okay, which culture?
I am a Choctaw. So I had my great aunt and my great grandmother walked in the Trail of Tears.
Ashe to them. Yeah, my background includes Cherokee, but of course, we're part of the Cherokee that was kicked out when the Dawes rolls came by. They didn't want those with that shared African ancestry to be considered to get some of the federal benefits. So yeah, we were robbed. My family was robbed. Still claim Cherokee, but yo, that stuff was real. Stuff is real. I'm not going to speak as a person who's heavily involved in the Hampton Roads Black Caucus. I can't really speak on the Norfolk issue, but I would just say people in Norfolk take a heavy look at that situation.
I would too. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
That wouldn't necessarily take away from the concept of gambling, just whether or not that particular business should open because of their racial history.
Well, I'm just simply saying, hey, clean your act up. There's some things that they could fix that are still on the table. And when those things are fixed, if I were a Norfolk resident and I was weighing in with my decision, which I'm not, I would be more apt. Let me shut up. Oh, man.
It's a weird thing, but I'm not necessarily against gaming at the oceanfront. That's a discussion, I guess, for many years down the line, because we seem to be slow moving to that. But I'm not against the idea offhand. We would need more to look at.
Hey,
I don't see that happening no time soon.
I agree. It's
casino and the beach?
No, I don't see it happening.
I don't see that no time.
I agree that it's unlikely. I'm just saying I'm not against it.
Understood. Hey, so let's move on to the third conversation. Miss Owens.
Okay, so the third one would be economic opportunity. And what do you see the best opportunity to assist in boosting our local economy would be? And how should we continue to pursue it?
So the best way to boost economic opportunity, well, we cannot, I guess we can be like one of my best friends, Samet. He's easily one of the hardest working persons I know, but he was a visa worker from Turkey as far back as 2012. He worked at the same hotel, started as a houseman, had exceedingly little English comprehension at the time, but he never took a day off. I'm going to use a curse word here. He worked his ass off, gained tons of information on how to essentially run a hotel, and boss liked him so much he helped start a business by buying the name of a golf place at the oceanfront, and he ran a golf place at the oceanfront, and the next year they looked for and found an available restaurant at the oceanfront, and he took that opportunity too. And one of the best things, boss, in a private conversation to me when Samet wasn't there, he told me that he could entrust him with a business like that because he knew that he wouldn't let it die. That's a high level of industriousness, both on boss's part and Samet's part. And I just get a kick out of the fact that he's essentially a 2-time successful business owner. In 8 years, he barely spoke a word of English 8 years ago. That's all private sector help. Now, I think it's possible for the public sector to help the private sector. And this is where I may lose some Republicans, because the public sector helping the private sector has philosophically sort of seemed forbidden. But I don't think it has to necessarily be so negative. And I know the phrase picking winners and losers and that the government shouldn't do it. It's there. It's been there for a while. But when you look at the various oceanfront tourism investment funds, you can see the city already places a tax on food, on lodging. It collects the tax and then it stores it in a fund, and then it's used to subsidize new oceanfront projects. It was used for the Cavalier, but that's something that technically should concern both Republicans and Democrats and independents, because much of the money was given to one developer to spruce the Cavalier up. And already establishing a big shot isn't the type of boost that I would necessarily want to subsidize, because that further enriches the already rich. I like the idea of boosting, and I use the term subsidizing, those who are beginning their journey into business, like with Cement when he was doing his. But I will wish to aim it more toward the industrious sectors of the more marginalized communities. I proposed this in various questionnaires and interviews with the HRBC, the AAPAC, a fund that is not too dissimilar to the concept of tourism investment funds, but one that is weighed to help minority businesses, startups, and away from just the oceanfront. I would like it to be public and private, open for private charity, but also receiving government revenue. Plus, I like the idea of member parties who become successful and they pay back into the fund. I like the idea that came from Republican Rosemary Wilson and has partially been spoken on to by Republican Eric Ray, eliminating the BPOL tax on startups for a period of about 2 years, because the government can apply a weight to a business by taxing it, and it can provide a boost by giving grants. I want to aim the boost toward new minority businesses are releasing as much of the weight in taxes in order to introduce more and more success into the community. We should be not so much picking winners and losers, but trying to eliminate the concept of so much loss anyway. I think Democrats and independents and Republicans can all agree to doing as much boost to new startups as possible. And that's a couple of ideas that I would like to, kick the tires on.
Interesting. I like the concept of boosting more grants towards the minority small businesses. I think the minority small businesses should also encompass small business owners within the LGBTQ community. I think if they were to open it up to those members, it would be incredibly helpful. I will say I have my aunts were owned a bakery, which they have since sold, but they made it into a very successful bakery in Virginia Beach, and they didn't have any of those grants. And it took a lot of hard work on both her and her partner to make it what it was, to the point that they got such a great reputation that the year before they sold it, they had already obtained the contract for the Ford commissioning, and they did the cake for the Ford commissioning in Newport News at Dream Cake. So I think moving it out to just not isolating it to within minority, within any of its, whether you're a Filipino American, African American, any Native American, but opening it up to the LGBTQ community would be helpful too. I think that would be that would definitely increase and boost. Other thing is, would you think that any other industry to bring down here, to bring within our city limits, that could help encourage additional growth within our economy?
The foundation for that, of course, is the basically over the ocean internet cables here that could spur a tremendous movement of other tech companies to the area, new tech startups in the area, as long as the municipal leaders are willing to zone properly, make sure that businesses aren't too loud. Because I remember when they were talking about building in the new data center, a lot of people were worried about the noise. So hey, don't just bring in the business. You got to listen to the communities, but also don't just immediately turn them away because you're worried about too much new business in town. I think we could find a pretty good fine line of new tech business and almost get a fourth pillar in here to go with the agriculture and the military and the tourism, simply because we are the starting point of the East Coast fast internet. And if we can do that in the most productive way, that could also help out a lot of people who are thinking about leaving Virginia Beach because there are not that many economic opportunities to graduate high school and stay here. Also, maybe we can look up to some educational aspects of helping to train more people into tech and will be a hub already. So more people would stay local and get enriched local. But again, this is not a vision over 2-3 years. It's a decades-long process.
Okay. It's interesting that you bring in the SGM, the sexual gender minority concerns into grants. That's something to ponder. Carol Schesventer, and I can say the name correctly now. It's taking me long enough.
My mom.
Okay. Conrad has a plant. With the new internet connections, would it not increase employment of high dollar incomes? Hey, you're the Politico, so what do you think? It sounds logical to me.
Yeah, most of the new industrial revolution was in computer and tech anyway. So that's where most of the new money would be. So put the new money in Virginia Beach.
So Mark Werman will make his money.
Over $400 million next year.
Is that a bad thing?
Not necessarily.
Not at all. I will say this, and this is from a person, and I have a heavy background in technology. I was a senior analyst at Anthem, and I understand the ins and outs, and being a digital marketing director definitely helped. I think at first, there's not going to be a multitude of high dollar jobs that are going to come in flux. I think the way that the strategy was, and I like where Conrad said, the fourth pillar, because I always said it would be, you need four legs to the chair for it to stand up. You sit on a tripod, it's not going to be that sturdy, but you need a fourth leg in order to keep up a sturdy chair and be able to sit the economy on. The technology realm, I think, is going to be the route to it because of those cables. We need to take that into consideration. We need to leverage them. We need to do everything we can to make them and put them to our advantage. Unfortunately, we don't have a technical person on council at this time right now, which was one of the reasons I felt like I wanted to run big, because I could help provide that insight. And I do have a huge network of people in a technical capacity who have startups across the country. I worked with multiple companies in San Francisco as well as Silicon Valley that I was actually working with these heads, talking to them about if we could get actual offices here to set as the Eastern hub, but start out by using our data center in order to go to the point of getting an office here. Once you use the data center and you want to start having an office get closer to that data center, then it makes sense, because there goes those high dollar numbers. For example, Prater Publishing Company was a very big internet company. They turned into Dominion Enterprises, which was a company I worked with for several years. Front.com, Homes.com, Truck Trader, RV Trader, all of them resided in Norfolk. If we could keep a portion of that, because they obviously have sold their companies because of Frank Batten Sr. leaving the company to his son, who, FYI, was a Berlucci and Jody Wagner contributor, his widow. But if we could keep some of that capacity in Virginia Beach, utilize those cables to our advantage, and have the right people in council to network with those individuals, could be the right route to bring those high dollar jobs. So we're not necessarily focusing so much on the military or the tourist industry, that we can always compensate in another area and not necessarily always have to go back on the agricultural.
And would you notice if hypothetically myself and Lucia were on city council, we would both vote for it? And we're different parties. So
yeah,
there you go.
Okay. You have a very impressive resume. I really feel like she was interviewing for the job. I was like, we're not hiring.
I always refer to myself as the person who is the most well-rounded employee, because I started out with a focus in criminal justice academically, political science, pre-law, and then I transitioned over into criminal justice and started dabbling into homeland security, got my master's in legal studies while I was in a marketing position, and then started focusing a lot into analytics. Actually started an MBA in analytics that my company was paying for at the time, and then my company was purchased. So then I had to step back from that MBA and then I focused a little bit more on the analytics side, and then now I'm back into the digital marketing, which works with my analytics background, which I have a lot of success with, thankfully. But yeah, I'm that utility player.
Nice.
Got you. Well, you brought up criminal justice. You brought up criminal justice. And so the big bang for the night is law and order, is police reform. So have at it. Have at it.
Okay, so everybody knows the city of Virginia Beach and their long-standing reputation, and how we are always being deemed as the safest big city in America for many years. This capacity is obviously, we're over New York, we're over Chicago, obviously. We're over a lot of other cities that are, considerably bigger than us, and some of them that are even the same size of us. So do you attribute this due to the caliber of our public safety personnel? And if so, why? And if not, then why not?
All right, so let's unpack this. This is the nitty gritty of tonight. So I'm going to touch on public safety. I will touch on the police. I will touch on guns. Buckle up. Now, we do have a rather safe record, and we have a respected police force. I could agree to those statements. I'm not exactly sure how much of a direct correlation that they are, but at least partially. Nor do I think we're seen as rather safe than we should then stop trying to do anything about trying to be even more safe. And I don't just mean violent crime with guns. I also mean things like some areas could contribute even more to safety. I'll touch on traffic, touch on e-scooters and stuff. So that'll be brought up. Public safety often will be varied into who's talking about it. And I'll have to point out how often RK sort of makes it seem like there's so much chronic violence at the oceanfront. It's not where we want it, but it's also not a big wave of destruction. He makes it seem like every night there's a gun shootout, and it's not. And hey, I've been on the anti-gun movement for over a year and spoke to council on supporting municipal building gun bans and against the ideas of gun sanctuary cities. That is a movement that has seemingly been very heavily Republican, but it's odd to my ears to be so heavily pro-gun everywhere and then sort of react shocked when there's gun violence. The city is weird on public safety and guns when you sort of look at it, because take a look at Pacific Avenue. 26 times this year, there's been hard vehicle crashes in the corridor near 16th Street. And the city hasn't been as proactive on that as it's needed to be in order to reduce those hard vehicle crashes. But they were sort of very active when it came to e-scooters. And I've been talking about that for over a year. They banned scooters at the oceanfront because they wanted to stop the injuries associated with their version of crashes for public safety. And the same leaders sort of dragged their feet on the car accidents are the same ladies that basically sprinted to the dramatic display of take down scooters and also gun constitutional cities. And guns are the only device of the three that it seemed to be used for that intended purpose, causing such harm and not suggested to be tempered down with. But scooters were designed for transportation, and they injure based on accidents. So it didn't seem like the logic fit. And I don't know what Democrats have to be to the party that it seems to be more leaning toward gun control, but they are. I don't know why Republicans have to lean to be so far toward gun support, but they do. I think a little logical symmetry is in order for this talk on public safety. And I think Republicans can sort of jump on board with me on that too. And I'll get to that point in a second. I observe the commercials these days, primarily from Mayor candidate Mr. Dyer. And I reiterate, he is a good man, but I am critiquing the commercials that try to make valid protests out to be like just looters. Even though statistically 95% of protests this year nationwide were nonviolent. The commercials try to make Virginia Beach one Jody Wagner election away from becoming Portland. And they even use local Black Lives Matter groups negatively to make that point. It doesn't have to be split by party on this matter. Do Republicans and Democrats like free speech and protest as a concept? They both do. Just this year, Town Center in Virginia Beach was the scene of a Republican pro-Trump protest that was against the mask mandates. They were harassed by police. Sometime later, in fact, the day after the May 31st protest, there was a town center protest where the police were the subject and social justice were the subject. And that one was much more violently stifled by local and even state police. Just look at the videos of the arrests. So both Republicans and Democrats can at least look skeptically about that type of government power. And this sort of comes back to guns because some leftist groups, like the Black Panthers, the original ones, were incredibly pro-gun. Malcolm X was pro-gun, but their fear was justified in aiming their desire to arm themselves because of a racially unequal society and a government that harassed them via the police in order to help keep that going. I'll give you the perfect example. It's these days too, Ice-T. He's famously pro-gun. His quote is this: "It's legal in the United States. The right to bear arms is because that's the last form of defense against tyranny, not to hunt. It's to protect yourself from the police." But notice that he said police. He didn't say eliminate the police, just to protect from the police because he's scared of them and he arms himself because of that. I grew up on Republican dogma that we're a freedom-loving society, liberty is the cause for all, and that you have guns to protect yourself from overreaching government. My biggest complaint on all that is that the rhetoric is sort of laid side by side this year. I'll use the word exaltation of the police, so much so that the natural reflex to police brutality is that whoever was on the other side should have just listened. That's the big reason why I don't run from the concept of defund the police, because I actually believe the Republican ideals of being wary of too strong a government. And some things that the government shoots you in the back when you're running, or it strangles you with a knee for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, or chokeholds you to death over loose cigarettes, that's government overreach. It's why I say Republicans should be joining me on the side of police reform, joining me on wanting to end civil asset forfeiture, joining me on wanting to end qualified immunity, on wanting to reduce police calls for benign offenses like calling over to a Starbucks over two Black men who were using the Wi-Fi for too long. That was in Philadelphia. There isn't anything inherently Republican about requiring the city to stop 69,400 vehicles like they did in 2019. We should reduce stops on benign things like plate stickers and simply mail the invoice like we do for red light cameras. Granted, I dislike those too, but still, we should have a strong citizens review board, and there isn't anything inherently Republican that says police shouldn't be accountable for their actions the same way other government employees are accountable for theirs. So the overall movement is reform. Reform on the authorities, police, and on the legal end, like ending the drug wars. That's a separate conversation, but it will reduce violence. Those are actually Republican when you think about it, at least according to the dogma. So I think we should all be a team on this matter, not just Democrats.
Dogma? Okay. Go, Miss Owen. Go.
Okay, so the first point I kind of differ in terms of your gun control being advocated by Dems, and you don't understand why they're not advocated by Republicans. It can be easily explained into the concept of the difference between Republicans and Democrats. Democrats are for big government, Republicans are not. That is one of the biggest breakouts between the two. Just like Democrats are for taxation, for high taxes or taxation, and Republicans are, their initiatives is no taxation without representation, hence the Tea Party slogan. So gun control is an imposition of additional big government. It's just an additional means of controlling some type of aspect. For example, they have the reckless law pursuit preemption law of that happened in the late 90s, and it essentially laid down the groundstone or the pathway to eliminate the capability of people for negligent lawsuits. Part of that has to do with the fact that you cannot sue a gun manufacturer for the death of a family member or loved one or whatever because of the fault of the gun manufacturer, because technically the fault was based off of the person operating the machinery. Just like you can't sue a car manufacturer like Ford, if their car was involved in a vehicle accident that ended up killing somebody. If you go into that world of eliminating that reckless lawsuit preemption within the firearm industry, there is no hindrance on any other industry. It's going to open up a can of worms. I think that that's kind of conveying the beginning of it, is that's how I feel as a person who's a gun control proponent. And I'm very pro 2A, and you know that. Now I'm not for, these people who go around. I'm not that one of those people who will actually have a firearm on their side where you can see it. But I do have a firearm, and I just feel that that's, if I'm not using it in a criminal capacity, I should not be subjected to negative reform for it. So that's just the argument there. Second thing is reform when it comes to police reform. Now here I got another question, the second part of the question for you, Conrad. Now, you brought up chokeholds and everything that happened to George Floyd and everything that's happened, to all the other individuals, I'm not okay with it. There's no reason that anybody should die by the police officers in any capable essence when it comes to putting a knee on someone's neck for 8 minutes and 47 seconds.
8:46.
Yeah, 8:46, and then that's ridiculous, but that's not a chokehold. That was putting somebody's knee on somebody's neck. Chokeholds are absolutely necessary, and I will say that if they're used in a proper capacity, if they are, because my argument is this, and the reason I will say that, and tell me if you disagree. If a police officer is incapable of having a chokehold, use the chokehold, what are they going to end up utilizing in order to restrain an individual who is resisting arrest? They are more than likely going to use something in a capacity that's more lethal. Correct? They're going to reach for their firearm, or they're going to reach for something that could possibly end up being more lethal. Chokeholds used in a proper capacity, when they're trained properly, can help to, if there's an individual who needs to be restrained, could help them in terms of restraining. I'm talking about whether the person's hopped up on quaaludes or whatever. And that's my baby, sorry. But you know what I'm talking about in terms of somebody who may not be in the right mental state. You don't know. The police officer doesn't know. The police officer doesn't know if the person is drugged out or if they have a mental problem or multiple personalities or something like that, because this is their first impression with the individual. Now, if they do it based off of person's color, that's ridiculous. I do not condone it on any way, shape, or form. I don't agree with anything when it comes to anybody's race, anybody's gender, when it comes to their sexual orientation. That's stuff that you can clearly see. What's in their mind, you can't see their chemical imbalance. You can't see any of that. But I think when it comes to reform, necessarily not reform, but more train, if that makes sense. And I will say, for example, and tell me if you disagree. There is an individual who has a podcast, and he's actually a former Navy SEAL. His name is Jocko Willink. And he will, and in my company the company that I work for is very big on his echelon front, extreme ownership. He knows his stuff. He will honestly say, you got to take into consideration when you're a Navy SEAL, that's all you do. You eat, breathe, drink, training. You train for months for a specific mission, right? These police officers get, how much training do they get? They get 13 weeks at the police academy, and after that they get maybe a couple hours here, a couple hours there of firearm training throughout the following year. They don't have ongoing training like they did when they were in the academy. They're not training like the Navy SEALs. Now, if they actually invested more in training them properly, then I think that would be the right route to go. I think it's not necessarily pulling funds. I think it needs to be given more funds in order to train them more, if that makes sense.
outweighs the point that maybe if we were strategically eliminating some things that are being policed, naturally reducing funds, you could then bring it back up for the training and not have to increase overall budgets in order to do that.
And I completely agree with that. I think training is the issue. I think that these guys that are reaching for the gun quicker because they don't know the route to go because they are not trained enough is probably because it's a instant reaction that is not been built, if that makes sense.
I don't know. Training. I think we have some of the best training for our first responders. I do think that consequences make different choices. So if I knew that if I had to face a consequence because I made a bad decision, I behave differently. That's what the judicial system is really kind of founded on. There's going to be some consequences. There are going to be some consequences. But when we say that one particular group is not going to have consequences for the same behaviors that others will have severe consequences for, then we have an imbalance of justice. And so, many of my friends will say, well, 99% of the 99.9% of the officers are great. So I have no problem with that. That means that we need to do something for that 0.01%.
Absolutely.
That are harming people. Because if we had 0.01% of pilots who were doing something wrong, we would fire them. We would not allow them to fly that plane. If we had 0.01% of bus drivers, school bus drivers, who did things that were reckless, we would fire them.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And so I believe this. If I harm an American, I should pay a consequence. And every American should be held to that same standard. If I'm a custodian, you have custody of your child. If while you have custody, your child is harmed, there are going to be consequences for you. So in custody, if I'm placed in custody and something damaging happens to me, there should be consequences. And when there are consequences, behavior will change. But you know what? I'm not the topic of the night. I got to step back. I'm fading out.
It has to be adequate consequences.
But also, not to just try to make the entire topic about the concept of bad apples. If part of the training that creates a lot of the bad apples is like a bad stem, or for instance, I don't want to necessarily keep mentioning particular anecdotes, but the Sandra Bland was stopped by proper training because she failed to signal. And then that entire arrest got where she was physically needed to be restrained. That started from a thing that was very nonviolent at all. And it ended up 3 days later with her death. That wasn't necessarily that particular bad apple, because that apple was brought to do something that all the other apples were also brought to do. So the reform is beyond just bad apples, but there are bad apples, but it's beyond just bad apples.
I think in Virginia, I think it also needs to be handled on a case-by-case scenario by locality. Because if you have instances like, for example, here in Virginia Beach, we haven't had an issue of police brutality or,
There was one this year.
So
this is why we would need a very, very strong citizen review board, because there was a police shooting death, I think, in the Indian Lakes area of Virginia Beach this year.
Really?
Yeah.
Where was that? When did that take place?
I think it was closer to June-ish. I could look that name up in just a second.
Okay.
But
as you're looking that name up, Conrad, you did say earlier you used that hated phrase, defund the police. So I know that Sister Owen, you pushed back on that, but I hadn't heard your response on that. So why don't we go there?
My response in terms of defunding the police is not necessarily defunding them. It's funding them properly. Right now, we have so many vacancies where police officers are already stressed out to the point where they're strained because of not having. It's 186 police officers that we're short of right now, and that it's not necessarily, I think, the consistency of the fact that we can't hire enough people. I think it's that we can't attract enough people for the job that it entails. The price, I mean, you got to take into consideration the city of Virginia Beach, they have a pay compression issue. You know, they passed some city council passed last year the ability to stop the pay compression. But they haven't addressed it still. You know, it's still an issue. I think the magnitude of what they're expecting them to the police officers to have to handle, anywhere from, you know, minor traffic infractions all the way up to, you know, May 31st, 2019. I think it needs to accommodate a proper rate, and guys that have been in the police force. I know, for example, I'll put this into consideration. This is a reference to pay compression. I went to school with a guy he's a SWAT team member, and I've known him since the first grade. And he entered into the police department 18, right out of high school. He was been in the police force for about 10 years and working in the academy. And then that's when he moved up to SWAT. There's another individual that I know that is also in the SWAT team, but he graduated from Old Dominion with a bachelor's degree. And as soon as he got out and he went into SWAT, he makes more money than the individual who had been on the police department for more than 10 years before him. And that's because of the college degree. And that's in reference to the pay compression. And I don't think that that's right. Somebody who has 10, 11, 12 years of experience should not make less than a person who came in right off the bat out of college. Experience at that capacity, you know, rewarding people for college degrees with lack of experience by higher compensation doesn't help with the situations of what we're seeing right now with these instances of not training them enough. They should have more training. And I think that kind of instills a little bit of a negative connotation. And that's why police officers are big against the pay compression. They think it's ridiculous. And I'm in favor of that same idea. But I am not for defunding them. I feel that they need to be properly funded, properly staffed, and properly trained.
I agree. Properly funded, properly staffed, properly trained, and properly punished. So when things go wrong, properly punished.
If you do something like what happened with George Floyd, or happens where somebody is walking away and from you, and they're following every guideline, there's absolutely no reason that somebody should die at the hands of a police officer. The police officers are supposed to be the good guys. That's what everybody was brought up knowing or thinking. That is what we train. That's what we tell I tell my daughter when she sees a police officer, that's one of the good guys. You know, it's not to have this aura of fear. And I think that unfortunately, when you see it on the television of, you know, what happened to George Floyd, it does infer fear now. And I think that by holding them accountable and people knowing that, you know, if they do something wrong, they're going to be held accountable, that aura of fear will diminish.
I think what happened with George Floyd is really kind of the wake-up call, like what happened with the Rodney King situation. You know, artists, musicians, people in the melanated community have been talking about this for years, and then it's not happening. Oh, well, maybe it happened once. And then with George Floyd, everybody saw it, and everyone's saying, you know what? People have been saying this for years, and we really didn't believe it, but now we have the preponderance of evidence. So I'll tell you what, my parents raised me when I was a child. You know, if you see a police officer, that's safety. And then when I became 13, they said you can't approach police officers anymore. You know, you just can't. You know, before when I was 5, when I was 6, I could run up to, I could hug them. I can, you know, but you get 13, you can't do that anymore. You know, when I was 15, you got to watch yourself around them. I had to live under that experience really until I was in my late 30s, my early 40s. Now, this show was supposed to be about Conrad. I got to step out of this. But I definitely
we largely share similar opinions.
I wanted to recognize Andrea Dixon. Conrad, you mentioned minimizing the amount of interaction police have to decrease. Okay, police have, should be comma, to decrease the percentage of negative interactions. What actions would you vote for or propose as a member of city council? That's a great question. Yeah, so let's say that, matter of fact, let's have Conrad and Miss Owen answer that, because Miss Owen was running for city council at one point. Thinks would be a great candidate. I have a lot of faith in you. And Conrad, you're running. So let's get your answer, both of you. What things could you propose to decrease the percentage of negative interactions or interactions in general?
I'll start off with Louise Lucas has recently submitted a bill to the General Assembly regarding the very similar topics of trying to reduce the type of traffic stop situations that begin with rather low dangerous to society type things regarding bad license plates, stickers. It just reduces the need for policing to even happen. So here's the other trick, is that this is a Dillon rule state. You would need a law like that to pass in Richmond first before we can really start trying to change the enforcement of that municipally. But if I was on council, that would be something I would be active for, is to try to say, I'm not saying reduce all traffic stops to zero, because that's equally as extreme as trying to say inflate the 69,400 number to 500,000. Reform simply means make it less prevalent in a positive direction. And I believe the police had said that number was part because they have a three-pronged formula that they believe helps traffic. But again, the National Highway Traffic Safety Board, and this is something I looked up about a month or so back, is citing that most accidents happen due to driver error at the time, not necessarily related to something like a sticker or a tail light out. That's a good place to begin with, is reducing the interaction of police stopping people over minor offenses. Of course, I would also want to try to do limiting of the drug war. But again, can you even do that on municipal city thing here in Virginia with a different rule state? Not necessarily, but I would be active in trying to advocate for it. And maybe this is the same type of thing. If we can have a like a sanctuary city or a constitutional city for the Second Amendment, you could also have it for the Ninth Amendment and the policing of things that shouldn't necessarily be illegal. Multiple different topics there, but it all comes to simply reducing the amount of policing for things that probably don't even need to be policed. And I'll start from there.
Okay, an argument against that legislation that Louise Lucas recently presented. It also includes headlights at night. And I'm sorry, but the car that's driving down a black road in Pungo, very, very dark road because it's midnight or so, and there's no headlights, that could end very, very bad. Same thing with if you're driving Charlottesville through the mountains on 64, heading towards 81, and somebody doesn't have a tail light, their tail light's out, they slam on their brakes, and you slam in front of them.
Getting a slight pause.
It looks like she froze for a second. So while we're awaiting Miss Owen to return to us, anything else you would add to that, Conrad?
Well, again, this is why lawmaking is so cool. If we were both in the General Assembly and I had proposed Louise Lucas's bill, and then Republican Lucia Owens was like, you know what, I don't like this part because it is a threat to public safety if you don't have your lights on at night in a very dark road. Then that means you got to take that strip out of the law and then resubmit it. So we would both be able to work together. But I also don't shoot down the entire bill because of something that couldn't be worked out because of something like headlights that you did not have on that particular night you were driving down Pongo, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. Hey, brother Jose, man, you know, the Beach Brothers loves Virginia Beach, and you're our business bully. You're, matter of fact, you're our bilingual business bully. Okay,
Neither.
So before we close for tonight, because I think Sister Owen may be having some challenge with the internet.
Right.
Do you want to shout out a business before we blank out of here?
Let's see. What's a good business? As a matter of fact, there's a new Puerto Rican restaurant that I haven't had a chance to go in and sit down and check it out yet. But it's right on Lynn Haven Parkway. But as a matter of fact, you were the one that told me about it.
Man, the food was absolutely perfecto. It was beautiful, man. I enjoyed it. I don't eat, mofongo with pork.
Right,
so,
right.
So my wife, she eats pork, and so the mofongo is pretty good. The platanos were decent. Everything was everything. I enjoyed it. It was it was definitely a taste of the island, man. So if you're in the Virginia Beach, Lynn Haven Mall area, I can't think of the name of the place, but you'll find.
I got the card right here.
Que rico.
It's called the Chinchorreo, Puerto Rican cuisine. It's located at 2720 North Mall Drive, Suite 160, right here in Virginia Beach, next to Lynn Haven Mall. So yeah, you're not the first person to tell me about that place. Tell me about how good the food is. Now I might have to go in there tomorrow afternoon and stop in, introduce myself, and bring my appetite.
Hey, let them know that Seko and the Beach Brothers sent you.
Indeed, I will, and then we can tell them both Seko and Jose from the Beach Brothers.
Hey, brother Conrad, I know you want to close for tonight, and why don't you close and then shout out our great sponsor that allowed you to drive in tonight.
There you go.
I'll remember, because when you're in a heavy campaign season like this for Virginia Beach City Council, you need to have the best car you can have. And I would suggest stop on by 1248 South Military Highway, Southern Volkswagen. Speak with Cynthia Rawlings, Charlie Roy. Get yourself a nice car. You would feel confident doing a lot of stops to forums in Virginia Beach or going to the latest Puerto Rican restaurant at Virginia Beach. You need a good car for that. So I would definitely suggest go on down to Southern Volkswagen in Chesapeake at 1248 South Military Highway. And if you would give me a little bit of time here, I'd like to have a nice closing out. And I also want to give my thanks to Lucia for coming on. I have an immense respect for her.
Indeed.
For more than a year, because I know she's been wanting to run. She's very active, strong Republican, and as a politics fan, I like people who are just that interested and care that much, and I could work with her. So I know that I'm not like treating her as the enemy because she's Republican. I have a lot of good faith in her ability to lead, just like I would for someone like Jessica Abbott, for instance. She's also very transparent, so I'm not here to rail against Republicans, but I am a Democrat, and I want you to guys look toward me optimistically to vote by November 3rd. And if I could do a closing that sort of brings in a friend of mine, I would like to shout out Jimmy Rogers, a Virginia Beach resident, also a Democrat, who got a little annoyed with me with the way in which I've handled people online who say something like the worst cities are Democrat-led. I was getting a little too Socratic when I should just bundle it down and do a good soundbite that sort of covers all the issues with the anti-Democrat critique. I'm not sure I can do that very well, but I'll give it a shot. The challenge was this: do I really want the country run by the same party that runs New York, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, and Chicago? I say you're looking at the wrong things. People think they're dangerous because of violence. And the violence comes from unequal prosperity and bad laws. The drug laws account for a lot of the violence, and they help create a lot of the unequal economic status. We glorify our cities because that's where our economic might is. And that's where most of the opportunities lie. That's why they're the most populous parts of the country. The Democrat Party is not perfect, but of the two, I would claim that they're trying to be more active on reducing the causes of that inequality. And we actually would want to push them to be true to their word Don't just vote someone like myself in there and then let off for 4 years. Constantly apply the pressure. And I think when you do that, those problems then can go away. So the conclusion is vote for Conrad Schesventer and the rest of the Democrats you can on the Virginia Beach ballot, and then apply the pressure to us, and we can get some positive things done.
Indeed.
All right. Well, I'll say that whomever you decide to vote for, we're going to have to apply the pressure afterwards.
Mhm.
We're going to have to apply the pressure afterwards. If we didn't get tangibles before the vote, we definitely need to push for tangibles and agenda after the vote. So,
Indeed.
yeah, you know, I'm Mr. Empowerment Agenda. I'm Mr. Tangibles. No tangibles, no vote. So
Okay.
I want everyone to exercise their right. Exercise your right. So, any last words, Jose, before we bounce?
Brother Conrad, that was a great closing, man. I wish you the best, and just thanks for tuning in tonight. And everybody, just make sure you get out there and vote, please. If you do nothing else, don't forget to vote, because you can't complain if you don't do anything about it. If you don't do something, make a decision to go vote, you're not being a part of the solution, but you're inadvertently still being a part of the problem.
We'll have to talk about that on a different show.
That could be a distinct show right there.
Because I firmly believe even if you don't vote, you still have a voice on policies that impact you and impact those around you. So,
Indeed, but
right.
you have to voice that and let it out.
Well, I'm simply saying that you have a voice, and voting isn't your only voice.
Bingo.
Voting is your only voice. I would also say that there are some of us who cannot vote.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't vote, you can't say nothing. When we say things like that, and I'm not saying that you said that quote,
No.
but when we say things along that line, we're denying people who are being impacted by policies, even though they can't vote. So whether you vote or not, the important piece is to be engaged in civic, in the civic life. Be engaged in the affairs of men, as Noble Drew Ali has said famously.
If you can't vote, please do, because a lot of people out there cannot.
Right.
So be a voice for them. If not, if you don't want to be a voice for yourself.
Absolutely. Hey, you can vote for Breonna Taylor, because she can't do it now.
Exactly.
You can vote for Sandra Bland because she can't do it right now.
Let that sink in for a second.
Eric,
yeah, let that sink in. Under the Democratic administration, nothing happened to address Sandra Bland's injustice.
Mm-hmm.
Let that marinate. Okay. you know what? We get more comments
again.
It is what it is. Yeah.
There you go, going back to food.
Comida. All right, y'all. Hey, you guys have a nice night. Thank you for watching the Beach Brothers Show. Hey, Virginia Beach. Hey, Norfolk. Hey, Chesapeake, Portsmouth, Suffolk, Hampton, Newport News, Williamsburg, Richmond, Isle of Wight. America. Guess what, America?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Guess what, America? We love you. We love you. We love you. This show was brought to you by Positive Vibes Incorporated, our consulting services. We do credit fixes. We do tax resolution. We lend private money and debt consolidation. So if you need some of these services, we're waiting here for you. Credit fixes, tax resolutions, private money, and debt consolidation. Make sure you call Positive Vibes Incorporated.